Hello, everyone. In Videoland, we're going to continue reading from one of our favorite books, featuring the exploration of the future. Breaking it off back at chapter number 4. Understanding change. The 6 super trends discussed in the last chapter have given us a way to begin to thinking about the global changes now occurring, and they have also introduced the concepts of trends as a way to think about change. A special value of trends, that is, they give us a bridge from the past to the future. By using trends, we can convert knowledge of what has happened in the past into knowledge about what might happen in the future. Our knowledge of the future is, of course, a very weak and very spotty kind of knowledge, but it can be used to create some crude maps of what may lie ahead. Like the great explorers, we must make use of whatever maps we can find, because any knowledge about what is really important is worth more than piles of knowledge about what is quite trivial. Trends give us important information about what may lie ahead, so they are a valuable asset in making practical decisions in our work and other activities. The longer a trend has lasted, the more certain we can generally feel that it will last at least a little longer, though we must be on guard because even long-term trends are likely to reverse direction sometimes quite unexpectedly. Let's look at the 2 trends, the increasing longevity and the height of people in the Western world. Historical data show that the average man in the industrial nation in 1800 was 5 feet 7 inches tall and lived to be 35 years old. By 1900, the average man was 5 feet 8 inches and lived to be 50. By 2000, the average man was 5 feet 10 inches and had a life expectancy of 76. 76, yep. If we project these trends into the future, say forecast Graham, T.T. Muller, men in the industrial nation will average 6 feet in height and live to be 81 by the year 2050. Whether or not these projections are realized in 2050, they enable us to think more realistically about the future of human height and longevity. At least we have a place to start. Many people will wonder what longevity and height will really be like in 2050, but we cannot make a firm, precise forecast. These trends, like most others, are likely to deviate from our projections for a wide variety of reasons. We can point to factors that seem likely to keep both these long-term trends continuing and even accelerating. Medical advances can be expected to help people grow taller and improve their chances of living a long life. Given the continuing promise of better technology and considering many people's desire to live longer and be taller, there could be major advances that would allow people to live for centuries and perhaps grow to 7 or 8 feet tall. On the other hand, we can imagine reasons why males in 2050 might be shorter and die sooner. For instance, the world economy might collapse, causing a global dark age with increasing hunger and disease that cause people to grow up shorter and die younger. An abrupt change in our proportions might also reduce our stature. A change in our priorities may reduce our stature. The human race should be shrunk for ecological and health reasons. Management consultant Thomas T. Samaras has argued in scholarly journals, shorter people tend to consume fewer resources and live longer. Nonetheless, most parents today would rather see their children become basketball stars than dwarfs, and some are already using human growth hormone to increase their children's size. By projecting trends, we come up with concepts of what conditions may be like in the unknown future. These concepts raise the questions: do we want the future we are headed toward, or should we try to change it? Trends are not forces of destiny, and trends in human activity result largely from people's decisions. Since the choices are voluntary and can shift greatly over time, the resulting trends are also likely to shift, sometimes radically. The uncertainty of forecasts based on trends is not something to be deplored, but rather accelerated, since the results from the increasing ability of humans to choose their futures. But to choose our futures, we need to understand the possibilities of the future. Trends give us an excellent way to begin this very important task. They can enable us to make better decisions about what we should do. Watching trends. Some of the most useful trends are actually indexes. That is, they combine a number of different trends into a single overall measure that tells us something useful. The Consumer Price Index, CPI, is one of the most watched statistics in the United States because of the people's interest in the prices of things they buy. The interest is further whetted by the fact that their salaries or benefits may be decided on the basis of the CPI. To prepare this index, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics sends data collectors into thousands of stores and offices around the country to determine the actual prices consumers pay for goods and services. The Bureau compiles and analyzes the price information to create the index. The Bureau provides the inflation calculator on its website, www.bls.gov, so visitors can see precisely how much the purchasing power of the dollar has declined over the past 10 years. Based on what has happened during the previous decade, we have a clue as to what is likely to happen in the next. It's hardly certain that our anticipations will be on the mark, but this trend in the CPI may enable us to make better practical judgments about our finances. The index of leading economic indicators also gets much attention because people are concerned about whether business activity will grow or shrink in the coming months. To prepare this index, the Conference Board, a business research group in New York City, www.conference-board.org, uses the 10 indicators. That is, things such as stock prices, the new orders to manufacturers that can indicate whether a change is occurring. By watching the indicator over time, we can see whether there is an upward or downward trend in what interests us. Most of us aren't interested in how many building permits are issued each month, but that number says something about economic activity. A rise in permits indicates that builders want to do more building, which suggests that they will be spending more money for goods and services. So the number of building permits issued is a good indicator of future business activity. But in large and highly diverse economy, the indicator could be misleading. So the Conference Board uses 10 different indicators for its leading index. We may not care about building permits, but we want to know whether businesses will be growing or shrinking because that gives us clues about whether we can find a new job easily or get a salary increase. By watching trends in the tension between nations, observers can judge whether a war is likely in the future. International indicators include such actions as one nation warning another nation or breaking diplomatic relations. Government agencies make extensive use of such indicators, but very little of their research is made public due to the possible reactions by the governments involved. However, if we wanted to know how likely a people is to become violent, the best indicators is unemployment among young men. According to a forecaster, Marvin Trenton, who often consults the U.S. agencies, young men are the demographic group most responsible for political violence and terrorism, and their inability to find work produces great frustration. On a more personal level, a knowledge of trends can help us to spend our money wisely. Consumers Union, www.consumerunion.org, tracks the performance of certain goods over a period of years. By collecting data about the actual experience of consumers using certain products, Consumers Union can tell us, for example, whether people who bought a certain model of a car have had to make a lot of repairs on it or very few repairs. If a model we are interested in has had a favorable rating over the few years, we can reasonably hope that the trend will continue in the future, and we can save a lot of headaches if we buy that car rather than one with a poor record for repairs. Overall, automobile manufacturers have gone a long way toward making vehicles more reliable, safer, and more comfortable since cars first appeared in the late 19th century. If we wished, we could use automobile quality as one indicator of the quality of life. If that indicator is combined with a number of others to create an index of overall quality of life, we would have a way to start keeping statistics about that would allow us to judge whether we are really making progress in improving human life or not. Furthermore, we also would have a way to judge whether we are on the right track or not. Governments and businesses increasingly use indicators to measure their progress. The government of India, for example, is trying to find accurate ways to measure the country's level of poverty. This would allow the nation to know whether its economic programs were really working to help the poor. However, indicators of quality of performance often lead to controversies because nobody wants to receive an unfavorable rating. But if we are serious about improving the future, we have to monitor our progress toward the goals we have set for ourselves. Monitoring key indicators so we can know whether the trend is up or down is likely to be highly important from our success. There are now enormous new opportunities to learn more about human life is changing. One reason is that we now have computerized systems for collecting basic data and then sorting and analyzing it very efficiently. Retail stores chains such as Walmart now use sophisticated systems to collect detailed data on sales of hundreds of different items in thousands of stores. This represents massive amounts of potentially useful information, and this knowledge can have immediate benefits. For instance, accurate real-time data on sales and prescription and over-the-counter drugs may serve as an early warning system for disease epidemics of terrorist activities. The practice of anticipating the future by means of trends is becoming increasingly important because we can't know even the present world simply by being in it. We need information, and we also need to make sure that our information is up to date. It seldom is. We don't really know the world as it exists right now, but only have an outdated image of the past world. Our unknown world. In a fast-changing world, knowledge quickly goes out of date, so very quickly that each day we are become ignorant of things that we once were familiar with. As a result, we all live psychologically in the world of the past. The actual world is quite different from what we think. For an insight into this problem, just imagine that we stayed home for 20 years without ever leaving or talking to anyone or receiving any news from the outside world. If we then emerge from some isolation, we must expect a huge series of surprises and shocks due to all the changes that have occurred in the intervening years. Today, most of us are in a position much like that. We live highly hermetic lives, shut off from the world around us by our own concentration on our own personal affairs and our own limited contact with what is happening beyond our immediate sphere of interest. As a result, we think we know about the world around us is mostly out of date. The extent of this problem was demonstrated by novelist Thomas Wolfe after he published The Bonfire of the Vanities. Critics surprised Wolfe by describing his book as prophetic, but they were wrong. Wolfe said he had not described New York as it might be in the future, but simply as it was while he was writing. The book only showed what was obvious to anyone who had gone out and looked in the new face of the city. Many readers, however, had apparently not done so, and they had mental images of New York based on what it had been like in the past. So they decided that the Wolfe must be talking about the New York of the future. To say current in our knowledge of the world, we cannot simply learn about the world in school and then assume that what we learned is correct, remains correct. If we want to live psychologically in the real world of today, we must learn to think in terms of trends so that we can anticipate the world as we must have changed while we were looking and how it must continue to change in the years ahead. Here's an example of how a study of current trends taught managers of a large corporation what the world around them was really like rather than what they thought it was like. In the 1960s, General Electric Company produced a report describing current social trends and projecting them into the future. Sometime later, an admirer asked the reporter's author, Ian H. Wilson, how the company was making use of the report. Just what is the company doing differently now? Wilson responded that the biggest impact of the report on the company was finding that white-collar workers were increasingly very rapidly as a percentage of the U.S. workforce and might eventually become the majority. Struck by this forecast, GE's managers looked at the company's current workforce and found to their surprise that the white-collar workers had already become the majority, yet the company was still structured as if blue-collar workers were dominant. The experience at GE illustrates how an effort to see the future can reveal the past. It can reveal the present, enabling people to correct their out-of-date beliefs and practices. Our thinking suffers greatly from antiquated beliefs about the world around us. We may continue to think of the Soviet Union as a great power long after the Soviet Union has ceased to exist, or we may think that there is no cure for a physical problem we suffer from because we are unaware that the physicians can now do for us. How can we realistically overcome our outdated thinking about the world? First, we must recognize that it is quite impossible to keep up with everything that is going on in the fast-changing world. However, we can learn a lot of very useful things about it, and the question is, how can we best go about this task? How can we equip ourselves with the most essential knowledge about the world around us? That's where the trends come in. Trends help us to organize our thinking about the changes, giving us a clear picture on the really important things that are going on. From this awareness often emerges key insights to aid in solving practical problems. Besides helping us to know where we are right now, trends can suggest that we are likely to be in the years ahead. For instance, if our city has been growing steadily as of late, it may well continue to grow. As a consequence, property values may increase because more and more people will be trying to buy land in the city than in surrounding areas. This recognition gives us a time-tested formula for making money in real estate. Buy into the path of growth. However, following such trends blindly can be risky. Population growth might introduce some people to move elsewhere, either to taking advantage of rising land prices or to avoid increasing traffic congestion, crowded schools, and soaring taxes. This too will affect the value of the land you might consider buying. No trend continues forever. Eventually it will slow down, halt, or reverse. The once mushrooming city may suddenly start losing business and population, causing property values to collapse. But if a trend is used cautiously, it gives us a good starting point for thinking about the future. Cycles, trends that reverse. We may think of trends as continuing indefinitely in the same direction, but as a trend may continue to reverse its course, its trend swings back and forth between positive and negative phases. We call this a cycle. A daily increase and decrease of sunlight is probably the first cycle that people have become aware of. Since sunlight is so important for people in the past felt that they had to worship the sun to make sure it would not abandon them. We now know that the cycle results from the rotation of the earth, and we won't worry about it. But we do worry a lot about cycles that affect business. The upswing and downswings in economic activity are far less regular than the sunlight cycles, but they are greatly impact on the ability of companies to sell their products. Certain goods, such as luxury items, are especially sensitive to changing phases of the business cycle. Home builders have to be very wary about the building just before they demand his housing starts to decline. If the builders can detect early signs that the prices are starting to plunge, they can stop building and sell off inventory as quickly as possible. People in business listen carefully to economics, hoping for guidance about what is likely to come in the level of business activity and the other economic cycles. But the cycles are irregular, and even if we knew just what they are, they might be difficult to judge where in the cycle the economy is now. So the economic predictions are often wide at the mark, and this has led to a cynical joke. Economists have predicted 9 of the past 5 recessions. The long-term cycle in the economy has attracted much attention, but remains quite uncertain and controversial. The so-called Kornilov wave gets its name from the Russian economist Nikolai Kornilov. In the 1920s, Kornilov studied the economic of the Britain, Germany, France, and the United States over a long period going back to nearly 2 centuries. He found that over a period of about 50 or so years, the wholesale prices in these nations would rise to a peak and then decline. After bottoming out, the prices would then rise and fall, and creating a new cycle. Kornilov was later arrested and executed by Joseph Joseph Stalin's government, which disproved the evidence that there might be forces beyond its control. However, this theory survived and it has remained controversial. The cutoff wave theory has great theoretical importance because it serves economic downturns expended by the Great Depression of the 1930s can lead to political instability, revolutions, dictatorships, and military aggression. Unfortunately, it seems quite possible that the long-term cycle is the irregular and unpredictable due to the operation chance factors and the operations of chaos subjects that we will be discussing in the next chapter. We may not be able to do much about the cutoff wave, and let alone the phases and the tides, but other cycles such as the upswing and downswings of animal and plant populations may be controllable to some extent. The population of a deer in a certain area may increase steadily as fawns are born, find adequate food, and reproduce. Eventually, however, there is no medical deer that can find enough food to starve, eat the bark of trees, uproot the vegetation, and generally destroy their environment. The population may then plunge and starve to starvation and disease. After most of the deer have died, the survivors can again find enough food to meet their needs, and the population growth resumes, starting a new positive phase cycle. Understanding the mechanisms of the population cycle prevents humans to intervene, but if they wish, they could prevent the adverse impacts of the cycle. In the case of deer, the herds may be culled and the excess of the animal sold as venison. Alternatively, contraceptives can be given to the animals to keep too many fawns from being born.